From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We've got 11 million people here who we're not all going to deport. Many of them are our neighbors. Many of them are working in our communities. Many of their children are U.S. citizens.
Immigration change delayed after a judge blocks President Obama's executive order to shield millions of undocumented immigrants from deportation. We'll speak to the head of the National Immigration Law Center and go to Houston, Texas, to speak with an undocumented immigrant impacted by the ruling. Then, as extreme cold temperatures blast the eastern third of the United States, 100 cities could break records for the cold. The fossil fuel industry has seen a series of disasters in less than a week, including an explosion at an Exxon plant in Los Angeles, the derailment of a crude oil train in Ontario, Canada, and the explosion of a so-called oil bomb train in West Virginia.
I made it about 10 feet. I heard the house caving in behind me. So I ran out of the house in my sock feet in the snow. The house was engulfed in flames.
And then, was it murder or suicide? As many as 400,000 people march in Argentina demanding answers to the mysterious death of a state prosecutor who is investigating the deadly 1994 bombing of a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Pro-Russian rebels are now fully in control of the town of Debaltseve, following a pullout by Ukrainian troops. Heavy clashes continued there over the past several days, despite the ceasefire agreement that went into effect Sunday. The Ukrainian military finally withdrew after suffering heavy casualties. The rebels claim the ceasefire never applied to the town. In Washington, State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki said, with the exception of the Debaltseve clashes, the ceasefire appears to have held in most other areas.
Reports indicate that separatists publicly declared that they refused to observe the ceasefire in Debaltseve and had a, quote, right to shell Debaltseve because it was, quote, their territory. The OSCE reports that the Russia-backed separatists continue to deny monitors access to Debaltseve and warns of grave consequences of those in the city if the ceasefire is not implemented there. The OSCE also confirms that ceasefire violations in Ukraine's east continue, as was the case yesterday, but the quantity and intensity of attacks has decreased, with the dramatic exception, of course, being Debaltseve, as I just outlined. We've also seen reports of the withdrawal of certain types of heavy weapons in various parts of Donetsk and Luhansk by both separatists and Ukrainian government forces.
Greece has formally asked the Eurozone for a 6-month extension of a loan agreement as it seeks to revise the terms of an international bailout. Talks between Greece and its European creditors collapsed this week amidst disagreement over the future of German-backed austerity. Greece had been given a Friday deadline to request a new extension of its bailout and loans. Germany's rejected Greece's demands so far, saying it needs to stick to previous austerity commitments. On Wednesday, the European Central Bank reportedly agreed to free up billions of dollars in emergency credit to Greek banks. Members of the Taliban in Afghanistan are reportedly set to hold a new round of peace talks with U.S. officials in Qatar. There's no firm timetable, but a Pakistani official said the negotiations could begin in March. The news comes as United Nations officials reported a 22% spike in Afghan civilian casualties last year.
Civilian casualties increased once again by 22%. to those in comparison to those of 2013. UNAMA documented more than 10,000 civilian casualties in 2014, the highest number of civilian deaths and injuries recorded in a single year since 2009.
We saw a 40% increase in children casualties, with some 2,700 children killed and injured, compared to 2013, and an increase in women casualties by 21%, with some 300 women killed and 611 injured.
The White House is holding a summit on countering the threat of violent extremism worldwide. In a speech Wednesday, President Obama called the Islamic State a perversion of Islam.
Al-Qaeda and ISIL and groups like it are desperate for legitimacy. They try to portray themselves as religious leaders, holy warriors in defense of Islam. That's why ISIL presumes to declare itself the Islamic State. And they propagate the notion that America, and the West generally, is at war with Islam. That's how they recruit. That's how they try to radicalize young people. We must never accept the premise that they put forward, because it is a lie. Nor should we grant these terrorists the religious legitimacy that they seek. They are not religious leaders, they're terrorists.
An explosion in an ExxonMobil refinery south of Los Angeles has rocked the surrounding area with the equivalent of a 1.4 magnitude earthquake. The blast in California happened as oil tank cars from a derailed train remained on fire Wednesday in West Virginia, 2 days after that accident. The derailment forced the evacuation of 2 towns and destroyed a house. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. As many as 400,000 people have marched through the Argentine capital of Buenos Aires demanding an independent judiciary. The protest came 1 month after the mysterious death of Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who had accused Argentina's president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, of helping to cover up Iran's role in the deadly 1994 bombing of a Jewish community center that killed 85 people and injured hundreds. That was his allegation. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. A military appeals court judge has overturned the 2007 conviction of former Guantanamo prisoner David Hicks. Captured in Afghanistan, Hicks was held at Guantanamo for 5 years before reaching a plea deal to return to his native Australia. Hicks admitted to material support for terrorism and agreed to renounce his claim of suffering abuse in U.S. custody. He had said he was sodomized, beaten, subjected to forced injections, allegations the military denied. Hicks was the first Guantanamo prisoner convicted under the Military Commissions Act. He appealed his case in 2013, saying his plea was made under duress. On Wednesday, David Hicks' conviction was struck down on the grounds his lone charge was not recognized as a crime until years after his capture. On Wednesday, David Hicks called on the U.S. to pay him compensation for medical damages resulting from his imprisonment and torture.
I'm sure no one is surprised by today's long-awaited acknowledgement by the government of the United States of America of my innocence. Even the Australian government has admitted that I had committed no crime. It's just unfortunate that because of politics, I was subjected to 5.5 years of physical and psychological torture, but I will now live with always. But I do think, however, that someone should be responsible for my medical expenses. I'm in a lot of trouble at the moment physically. It's even affecting my ability to do my day job, which is my only income. So I'm in need of operation on my left knee, my right elbow, my back. My teeth keep getting pulled because I couldn't brush them for 5.5 years. So it's becoming a very expensive exercise to fix myself from the years of torture.
David Hicks had previously said he would have died in Guantanamo had he not pleaded guilty. Also Wednesday, Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott refused to apologize to Hicks on behalf of the Australian government. A former Guantanamo Bay interrogator involved in torture was also a longtime Chicago police officer known for abusing people of color. According to The Guardian, Richard Zuley spent 3 decades as a notoriously brutal detective on the Chicago police force. From 1977 to 2007, Zuley used tactics including torture, threats, and abuse to elicit confessions from suspects, the majority of whom were not white. One of those confessions was later ruled to be false, then the sentence vacated. Zuley's methods including shackling suspects to walls through eye bolts for several hours, allegedly planting evidence and issuing threats of harm to family members and sentences of the death penalty unless a suspect confessed. Zuley was also accused of brutal methods at Guantanamo Bay, where he was a reserve officer in charge of interrogating a prisoner who said he made a false confession due to torture. The White House says around 11.4 million people have signed up for health insurance during the second enrollment period of Obamacare. In a video posted by the White House, President Obama said his signature health care program is doing better than expected.
It gives you some sense of how hungry people were out there for affordable, accessible health insurance. And that's really the top-line message. The Affordable Care Act is working. It's working a little bit better than we anticipated. Certainly, I think working a lot better than many of the critics talked about early on.
The Justice Department's reportedly prepared to sue the Ferguson, Missouri Police Department if it doesn't address racial bias in its practices. According to CNN, outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder will announce the findings of a federal probe in the coming weeks before he steps down. The Justice Department's expected to accuse the Ferguson police force of a history of systemic bias, backing the claims of a recent lawsuit that accused local officials of targeting people of color with arrests, tickets, and fines. Eric Holder, meanwhile, has announced he will support a national moratorium on the death penalty. Holder made the comments in light of a recent Supreme Court decision to stay executions in Oklahoma pending a review of its lethal injections.
Now I'm speaking personally, not as a member of the administration, so somehow separate yourself here. I think there are fundamental questions that we need to ask about the death penalty. I've not been shy in saying that I am a person who is opposed to the use of the death penalty. The Supreme Court's determination as to whether or not lethal injection is consistent with our Constitution is one that ought to occur. From my perspective, I think a moratorium until the Supreme Court made that determination would be appropriate.
Sub-zero temperatures have engulfed the eastern third of the United States today as a blast of Arctic air rolls in from Siberia. The cold's expected to shatter records in more than 100 places. We'll have more on this later in the broadcast. Hillary Rodham Clinton has held a private meeting with the senator many progressives hopes will challenge her for the Democratic nomination, Elizabeth Warren. The New York Times reports Clinton invited Warren to her Washington, D.C. home to consult on building a populist economic agenda. Warren's been one of the Senate's leading voices challenging corporate power and financial deregulation, including policies advanced under Clinton's husband, President Bill Clinton, in the 90s. Senator Warren has said she's not running for president, but progressive activists have launched a campaign urging her to reconsider. During their meeting, Hillary Clinton reportedly did not ask Warren to endorse her likely presidential campaign. And the University of Massachusetts Amherst has backed down on a plan to bar Iranian students from science and engineering programs following a wave of protests. Last week, the university said it would ban Iranian nationals from graduate programs in chemical, computer, and mechanical engineering, as well as natural sciences, in what it said was a move to comply with U.S. sanctions dating back to 2012. But after a chorus of outrage from both students and faculty, UMass said Wednesday it will lift the ban and implement a less restrictive policy. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama's plan to shield as many as 5 million immigrants from deportation was supposed to begin taking its first applications this week. But late Monday night, U.S. District Judge Andrew Hanen of Brownsville, Texas, issued an injunction after a motion filed by Texas and 25 other states. Now the administration says it'll comply with the ruling and delay accepting applications for work permits and deportation reprieves. Speaking at the White House, President Obama said he's confident the decision will be struck down on appeal.
Keep in mind that this is something that we necessarily have to make choices about, because we've got 11 million people here who we're not all going to deport. Many of them are our neighbors. Many of them are working in our communities. Many of their children are U.S. citizens. And as we saw with the executive action that I took for dreamers, people who had come here as young children and are American by any other name except for their legal papers.
President Obama's executive order on immigration would apply to those brought to the U.S. illegally as children and have lived here for at least 5 years, as well as those who've lived here for at least 5 years and are the parents of U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. It remains on hold as the case is appealed, possibly ending up before the Supreme Court. Well, for more, we're joined by 3 guests. In Washington, D.C., Marielena Incapie is executive director of the National Immigration Law Center, which filed a court brief opposing the challenge to Obama's order. In Houston, Texas, Jose Espinosa is with us, an undocumented immigrant who'd hoped to apply for relief on Wednesday. And in Houston as well, Oscar Hernandez, who was granted relief in 2012, now a lead field organizer with United We Dream in Houston, Texas, where he's been helping to get eligible immigrants like Jose ready to apply. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Let's begin with Marielena Incapie. Talk about the significance of this judge's ruling and the court case on which it was based.
Thanks for the invitation, Amy. This is an extremely disappointing decision by a conservative judge in Brownsville, Texas. It's not a surprise that Texas and 25 other states chose Brownsville to file this lawsuit. While it is disappointing, it is also an outlier. This decision pretty much ignores decades of legal precedent and constitutional authority. It's interesting the judge did not rule the president's initiatives as unconstitutional. He decided to focus in 123 pages on a very procedural issue, which basically the judge found that the administration failed to follow the Administrative and Procedures Act and didn't go through a public comment period. That, despite the fact that legal scholars across the ideological spectrum agree with us that this wasn't required, that the president has prosecutorial discretion just as any other law enforcement agency does to decide how to use its limited resources, who to deport and who not to deport. And recently, the Supreme Court in 2012 in the Arizona versus U.S. Decision said very clearly and actually gave examples such as the administration has the authority not to deport parents of U.S. citizen children, workers, and others for humanitarian reasons. The president simply expanded the DACA 2012 initiative that he announced then, which is not being challenged by Texas and these states either.
I want to read from Judge Andrew Hanen's opinion. He wrote, quote, "The court finds the government's failure to secure the border has exacerbated illegal immigration into this country. Further, the record supports the finding that this lack of enforcement, combined with this country's high rate of illegal immigration, significantly drains the state's resources." Marielena Incapie, talk about what he is saying here.
Yeah, the interesting thing, Amy, is our communities, especially those that live and work at the border, know full well that, in fact, this administration has very aggressively enforced. There's nothing about lax enforcement under the Obama administration. The border is more secure than ever before, and we've got record numbers of deportations in this country. What the administration finally did, and this is as a result of immigrants who have fought for and won this very significant victory. We're talking about dreamers, including some of the folks on today's show, dreamers, mothers and fathers, workers who have fought for this, including putting their lives on the line, civil disobedience, hunger strikes, et cetera. That is what has brought us to this place, the grassroots energy. And the judge basically decided to ignore even law enforcement leaders who came out in support and said, we need this for public safety reasons.
I want to turn to comments by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who led the lawsuit against Obama's executive order on immigration, along with 25 other states. He spoke on Wednesday.
The district judge ruled that it was clear that the president's executive action violated what's called the Administrative Procedure Act. And because of that, it was unnecessary for the judge to dig deeper into the other legal claims that we've made. It is abundantly clear that the Obama administration has violated the Administrative Procedure Act. And as a result, I think that on that issue alone, we will win all the way up through the appellate ranks.
After a judge ruled in his favor, Governor Abbott tweeted President Obama's order, quote, has been ruled unconstitutional. Marielena Incapie, is that correct?
Absolutely not. That is incorrect. And in fact, it's a reminder that Governor Abbott's comments are, this lawsuit is not about the legality or the constitutionality. This is a communications campaign by opponents of the executive action and, frankly, by opponents of immigrants. It's not a surprise, Amy, that when you look at the states that have filed this lawsuit, these are states that have passed anti-immigrant legislation, anti-worker legislation, anti-choice legislation, and who really are basically afraid of the demographic shift happening in this country. That is what this lawsuit is about.
Now, it's not as if we didn't know what the judge's personal views were. He previously called President Obama's reprieve for undocumented immigrants, quote, an open invitation to the most dangerous criminals in society.
Yes, unfortunately, that is why we expected this decision. And we expected the decision. Our communities are ready and prepared, and we see this as a temporary setback. This is not the end of this. And in fact, it's really important for viewers and listeners to understand that this decision does not affect the current DACA program either. Those who currently have DACA under the 2012 initiative or who are up for renewal or who haven't applied yet are still protected. That this decision, and it doesn't also affect any of the other initiatives announced by the president on November, including the new priorities with respect to deportation.
I want to turn to Oscar Hernandez and Jose Espinosa in Houston. Oscar, you were a recipient of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program known as DACA that Mary Elena was just talking about. This doesn't affect you. But you are also a lead organizer for United We Dream in Houston. You organized for this executive order. Can you explain how you organized and what this judge's decision means for you?
Yeah, so for this executive action, we took a lot of measures. This has happened since way back in 2010 when the Senate failed us and the DREAM Act didn't pass. So we were organizing to fight for some kind of administrative relief for our community. I was lucky to benefit in 2012 to be able to apply for deferred action, and it's because of that that I'm able to help our community. Right now, we still are servicing people. We're helping people apply for deferred action. We have legal clinics throughout the year and making sure that our community know what's happening. Like the attorney said before, we were expecting this. I mean, I live in Texas. We know the reality of what the demographic is like here. So we were expecting this to happen, and we're more than prepared to inform our community to not be afraid, to know that this is a temporary setback, but it's only temporary. We will be able to continue our process, and more than anything, to know that just because we're here undocumented does not mean that we do not have value, and it does not mean that we won't contribute. So through our program, what we want to do is make sure that our community feels empowered, is properly informed, and that we're fighting for immigrant rights. And if you can benefit from DACA, we want to be able to service the community. This is only a delay. This is not a delay for United We Dream. We will continue to do the services we do. We will continue to inform our community, and those who can benefit from the first deferred action that came out in 2012, we'll be able to help them. And those who may benefit from the 2014 deferred action expansion and deferred action for parent of American citizens and legal permanent residents, we will be offering services and information on that. So this is not going to stop us.
Jose Espinosa, I want to first of all thank you for joining us. I know you drove an hour and a half to get to this interview, and it's your first TV interview. You're risking a lot to come out of the shadows and say you're an undocumented immigrant. You were planning to apply this week?
Yes, I was.
And talk about your own story and why this was so important to you.
Well, it was so important for me because it's just not just me, it was also my family, because for so many years I've been looking for an opportunity to become legal and being in this country and able to work. And it was for my family to finally being just for a better life here in the United States. I'm sorry.
So, in your time here in the United States, when did you come to the United States? Where have you been working?
I came to the United States as a kid when I was 14 years old, and I started working in different places, and right now what I've been doing the most for the last 12 years is I've been working in the oil field industry, and I've been doing I've been working for companies known worldwide, and this is something that can benefit, that has been benefiting me and my family because of this.
So you've been married for 15 years. You came here when you were 14 years old. All 3 of your children are U.S. citizens?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
So you were too old to apply under DACA, as Oscar Hernandez did?
Yes, I didn't have the age for that, and finally, when this new law came in place, I was very excited, and I was willing to move out of the shadows, to come out, and through Oscar's help and their organization, I was finally I saw the chance to do that, and actually I had everything ready. And but one day before, my dream came down.
Oscar Hernandez, what are you telling people like Jose to do right now? I mean, Jose came to your workshops. He got everything in order. What happens now?
First of all, save your money. We want people to avoid fraud. We know that our community is very vulnerable, and we want to make sure that they get the services we deserve. Second of all, prepare the documentation. Like I said before, this is something we expected, and we will continue to fight for immigrant rights. Deferred action was not given to us. This was something that was organized by undocumented immigrants, youth in our community, and we were able to win this, and we will continue to prevail, and we will continue to fight for immigrant rights and make sure that we get the representation we deserve. So anybody who's out there who might potentially benefit this, who might think they benefit from this, go to our webpage. You can go to unitedwedream.org and get more information. And then you can also look up services near where you live, where they provide either free legal services or fees at a nominal fee. If you're preparing your documents right now, make sure you have everything in order. Look for people that you can trust in your community, but don't be afraid. You know, we expected this to happen, and we expect to pass. We expect something to pass within the coming months or coming weeks. So, you know, right now we're hoping that President Obama presses the Department of Justice for an appeal to make sure that we move this as quickly as possible. But this is not the end of the road for us. We will continue to fight for immigrant rights, and we will continue to help people who may benefit from DACA and DAPA, and to help our immigrant community.
Oscar, it may not end just with this court decision. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he'll sign legislation to repeal the state's DREAM Act if it comes before him. This is Governor Abbott.
The way the law is written is that students who are applying for in-state tuition under that law must be making progress toward establishing legal status. And there's absolutely no rules or regulations or determinations to see whether or not they are fulfilling the law as it is written. So at a minimum, the law has to be fixed.
The Texas DREAM Act offers in-state tuition rates to children of undocumented immigrants. It actually went into effect under his predecessor, Governor Perry. Oscar Hernandez, your reaction to Governor Abbott, and as we wrap up, your parents, where, Oscar, are they, and where do they stand in all of this legislation and these executive actions?
So it's really good you bring that up, because the fact of the matter is that this executive action, this deferred action, it is not really a solution to the issue of undocumented immigrants here. It's a step forward. It's a step forward in the right direction. But for example, my parents, who have been here all my life, they own houses, they own a business, they're still undocumented. And based on the regulations from USCIS, they might not potentially benefit from the deferred action for parent of American citizens or legal permanent residents. So we know that this is not the final step for us. This is not the final step for our community. And even when it comes to Greg Abbott's comments, referring to the Texas in-state tuition that allows undocumented immigrants in Texas to get financial aid to go to university. We know that this is this is more playing politics with our community. And that, to me, is something I will not stand for. You know, people over politics. That's one of the big things we tell people, that we will not let anybody play politics with our immigrant community, because that's not that's not how I know this country is based on. So just like a battle that there might be going on right now for deferred action, there is one happening for in-state tuition. And this is something we are also involved in. If there's any undocumented youth out there who might be graduating, who also might feel like they're hopeless because they might think that they can't get a job later on, they might think that they can't go to school, we're here to tell them that you can. We know people that have done this before. We know Texas has helped us, undocumented immigrants apply to colleges and get financial aid, and we will continue to fight to make sure that other immigrants and other undocumented youth that are here can take advantage of these services. And we will continue to fight for parents who might not benefit from deferred action and our LGBTQ community who sometimes is neglected when it comes to this. So, no, there is a lot of power with undocumented immigrants. There is a lot of power for the community, and we intend to use that power.
Jose Espinosa, I want to end with you. As I said, you drove an hour and a half for this interview, and it's your first time speaking, and you're risking a lot. Why did you decide to do this?
I want to be an example for everybody like me in my position to come up and not be afraid and use the resources that are available through organizations like United We Dream and others. Many friends I have, they're afraid to come up. They're afraid to say something. They're afraid to show. And they're afraid or insecure because of they don't have the resources. They don't have the ways to help their families, and it's just different. It's just I lost myself.
So are you?
I just want them to I just want to give them an example and show them that yes, we can do it, and there are people out there that can help us.
Jose, I want to thank you for being on with us, for your bravery. Jose Espinosa is an undocumented immigrant who had hoped to apply on Wednesday for consideration to stay in the United States under the expanded Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that's part of President Obama's executive order. He now cannot make that application, but will continue to follow your case. I also want to thank Oscar Hernandez for joining us, who is a lead field organizer for the United We Dream in Houston, Texas, where he's lived for more than 15 years. It's an immigrant youth-led organization fighting for relief and fair treatment for all undocumented immigrants. I also want to thank our guests in Washington, D.C., Marielena Incapié, Executive Director of the National Immigration Law Center. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, record cold strikes a third of the country. Maybe 100 cities will post record lows today. At the same time, we're seeing explosions at oil plants, derailment of oil bomb trains, as they're called. What does this all mean? What can we do about it? Stay with us.
Watch the city streets vanish when we're feeling them. Handling, we do our thing, and we're gonna win. Revolution will not be televised. We're marching in. Listening to the sound body on painting in. Plus I'm leaning in to the left, melanin. Generating another level of thought development. Altering anomaly sentiments with intellect. See, I found beauty in the strength of our unity and unison with our people's history and legacy. I'm more sensitive, sentiment of a falling star. Everybody say rest in peace, Salazar. I break bread with veterans of the urban board. Past, present tense, still rocking Pendletons. I only move when the people say it's movement. So assume that a rebel is your future president. Browning of America.
The Browning of America by Olmeca. The video for their song was made in collaboration with Puente Vision and the National Day Laborers Organizing Network. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Sub-zero temperatures have engulfed the eastern third of the United States today as a blast of Arctic air rolls in from Siberia. The cold's expected to shatter records in more than 100 places. It comes as scientists at Rutgers and the University of Wisconsin-Madison have published a new study linking extreme weather, including record cold, to climate change. They say warming temperatures in the Arctic have caused wavier fluctuations in the jet stream, the air current, which carries weather patterns. The scientists predict the frequency of extreme weather will increase as the Arctic continues to warm. Meanwhile, the fossil fuel industry, which is largely responsible for global warming, has seen 3 major disasters in less than a week. On Wednesday, an explosion at an ExxonMobil refinery south of Los Angeles rocked the surrounding area with the equivalent of a 1.4 magnitude earthquake. Plant worker Jason Hernandez described what it felt like.
Felt the explosion really hard through my body, and it scared me. I got scared, and I'm not gonna lie. First thing I thought of was, let's go meet up with our team, figure out what's going on. Seeing smoke going through the air. And we had a good evacuation point. Everything was planned, well executed. Everybody met where they were supposed to meet. Nobody got hurt, thank God. I didn't get hurt myself, thank God. And I just appreciate being here right now.
The blast in California happened as oil tank cars from a so-called bomb train remained on fire Wednesday in West Virginia 2 days after the accident. The derailment forced the evacuation of 2 towns and destroyed a house. The man who lived in the house, Morris Bounds, told local news station WSAZ he barely escaped as the tank cars barreled toward him.
Made it about 10 feet. I heard the house caving in behind me. So I ran out of the house in my sock feet in the snow. The house was engulfed in flames.
The derailment in West Virginia happened just 2 days after another oil train derailed in Ontario, Canada, which also left tank cars burning for days. We go now to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Steve Kretzman, Executive Director of Oil Change International. Steve, can you talk about what's happening? All of these derailments, explosions, the backdrop being some of the coldest weather this country has experienced.
Yeah, I think you framed it well, Amy. I mean, and it's too bad that most people are not making the link here. Climate policy and energy policy are not usually discussed together in this country, but there's a huge link because, of course, the fossil fuel industry is primarily responsible for climate change, and that's what we're seeing. This is, you know, these explosions that have happened, the crude by rail derailments, the Torrance refinery explosion, et cetera. This is all a completely and sadly predictable result of the all of the above energy policy that the Obama administration has been pursuing, and that really is the only real energy policy in town here in Washington, unfortunately, despite the fact that the administration says that they're very committed to addressing climate change. And indeed, parts of the administration seems to be, but I think they haven't quite made the connection yet that these two things are fully or not fully compatible.
It's interesting you talk about climate policy and energy policy not being linked. When you watch television, all the networks now, they don't just have weather centers. They have extreme weather centers or severe weather centers. So you tune in for news and you tune in for weather, but rarely do they link the two. Like, for example, call it a climate change center or a global disruption center when they're giving you the news. I want to turn to West Virginia first. What happened there?
So you had a train that was coming from the Bakken, the North Dakota crude, that's very light and very flammable, that came around the turn at the gentleman's house, where we heard from him just a moment ago, and came off the rails and ignited. These were actually the newer rail cars that we have been told are supposed to be safer than the old rail cars, which are being phased out, and yet obviously and sadly they are not particularly safer, and they are not adequate to protect public safety. You know, there's new regulations that are pending by the Department of Transportation to actually supposedly make crude by rail safer, but these regulations are already watered down. Industry is intervening again to water them down further. And, you know, what we're seeing here is a regulatory process in Washington that unsurprisingly remains captured by the fossil fuel industry and their millions of dollars in campaign donations, and really has the bureaucracy here, for the most part, cowed.
So how has West Virginia been affected by, and what is an oil bomb train?
So these are at times mile-plus long trains filled with explosive crude oil that move through communities, not only in West Virginia, but increasingly across the United States, move through people's backyards, move by schools, et cetera, et cetera. And there's been a huge increase in these trains in recent years as we've seen an explosion in North American oil production. And so that is, they're moving Bakken crude, which is highly explosive, as we saw before. They're also moving tar sands crude in some cases, and we had actually over the weekend we had an explosion in Canada of a train carrying tar sands crude. So you know this is
explain what happened there.
Problem.
Explain what happened there, Steve, in Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, similarly, you had a tar sands train that went off the rails and exploded. You know, and this is again the kind of thing that we have been seeing happen again and again with this industry. You know, I think it's interesting because you get the industry says, oh well, this is why we need pipelines, because you know rail is more dangerous, but that's not a choice at all. A choice between pipelines or rail is really a choice. It's a tremendously bad choice. The real choice is about energy policy for the future and whether or not we're going to choose clean energy or whether or not we're going to continue to use fossil fuels that not only pose great dangers to our communities but also obviously ultimately drive climate change.
Steve Kretzmann, you have a map on the Oil Change International website which illustrates the shipment of oil by rail across North America. You see colored lines representing different rail companies which form a vast web across the entire United States. Talk about how communities from California to Florida to Massachusetts are impacted by these shipments.
So these shipments are increasing in frequency and going through people's backyards on a regular basis, and we totally encourage people to check out the map on priceofoil.org and see where these rails are running through your community. Unfortunately, it's been extremely difficult to get real-time data from the states, and not to mention the federal government or the companies, about when these shipments are due and what the exact routing of them is at different times. That is not something that that regulators have seen fit to actually release to the public, and I think something that people would be very interested to know. For instance, if bomb trains were moving behind daycares when daycares are in session, or schools, or these kind of things. You know, people deserve to know what the risks are of this huge increase in industrial activity, and that information is not being made available at this point.
Steve Kretzmann, I want to go to the oil refinery explosion, the ExxonMobil explosion that took place yesterday in Los Angeles, which came on the 18th day of an historic strike by oil refinery workers, not, though, at that plant. More than 5,000 workers at 11 plants are on strike in the largest action of its kind in decades. The workers say safety issues, including safe staffing levels, are their top concern. While workers at the plant that exploded in Torrance had not gone on strike, their colleagues were on a strike at a nearby plant in Carson, California. Refinery worker Erica Kent spoke to local station KCAL in Los Angeles earlier this month.
They say that a certain amount of fatigue is comparable to being drunk, right? So when you're working 7 or 8 days in a row, sometimes 13 or 14 in a row, and you're working 12 hours a day on a rotating shift, it creates a safety hazard.
Can you talk about what she is saying, what the refinery worker Erica Kent is saying, and although the Torrance plant, the workers were not on strike, how they're related?
I mean, I think throughout this, what we're seeing is the industry, unsurprisingly to those of us who've followed the industry for years, continues to prioritize profit over people and safety. And, you know, that extends to the workers. Oil Change International, my organization, was quick to put out a solidarity statement with the striking workers, but it also extends to communities and ultimately to, you know, our entire planet, where the industry is recklessly moving forward and prioritizing their profits over all of our safety at the end of the day. And so there's a clear connection here and a clear pattern of behavior that is irresponsible and dangerous and, you know, and tragic, because, you know, at some point people will recognize that climate change means that we have to transition away from fossil fuels sooner rather than later. It's, you know, all of the above is climate denial at the end of the day.
Last week, Steve, the Republican-controlled House gave final passage to a measure approving the Keystone XL oil pipeline, but the bill does not have enough votes to override a veto from President Obama, who's vowed to reject it. On Friday, Republican House Speaker John Boehner called on Obama to approve the pipeline.
It's pretty simple. Keystone XL pipeline is a good idea for our economy, and it's a good idea for our country. Members of both parties know it. They've put politics aside and passed this very important bill. The President's own State Department says this project will create up to 42,000 direct jobs. Many labor unions know it. They say Keystone just isn't a pipeline, it's a lifeline for America's construction workers. And the overwhelming majority of the American people know it as well. So to the President, I would just say this: do the right thing. Sign this bill and help us create more jobs in America and create a healthier economy.
That's Speaker Boehner. President Obama said he'll reject the Keystone XL oil pipeline if it would significantly increase carbon emissions. Earlier this month, the EPA warned the pipeline could increase greenhouse gas emissions by the equivalent of about 8 new coal-fired power plants. Steve Kretzmann, if you could talk about this and then about the divestment movement. We only have a minute to go. The latest school to divest from fossil fuels, New School here in New York City, has announced it'll divest its endowment from fossil fuel companies. In an email to the university president, David Van Zandt, and Provost Tim Marshall announced the New School's Board of Trustees approved a motion to divest from fossil fuels. The board's investment committee has also approved a significant investment of the university's endowment in renewable energy. How significant is this, Steve Kretzmann?
I mean, I think the divestment movement is one of the most significant developments on the climate change activism scene ever. We're seeing a huge upwelling of people who are concerned about fossil fuels, and it's less about the exact amount of money that's being divested moment to moment, and more about the mobilization of people who are really making clear that their future should not be fossil fuels. You know, we saw this 400,000 people in the streets in New York City last fall, and that was an amazing moment. You know, power comes from two places. Speaker Boehner gets it from the money he gets from the fossil fuel industry, but the activists and people who are concerned about clean energy get it from an increasing number of people who are concerned about this. And ultimately, we believe that the president will side with those people and see the science for what it is, which is that the Keystone XL pipeline will indeed cause a significant increase in carbon emissions and should be rejected.
Steve Kretzmann, I want to thank you for being with us. Executive Director of Oil Change International. Will link to your map of the rails through the United States carrying oil trains at democracynow.org. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, why did close to 400,000 people march in Buenos Aires, Argentina? Stay with us.
con cuántos palos haces la canoa. Dime con cuántas verdades me vas a engañar. Dime que estás aquí, dime que estás por llegar, con tu guía y tu canoa y las olas del mar. Dame lo que tú tienes para mí. Dámelo. Dame la alegría y un poquito de ti. Dame por mi bien, dame que te da igual. Dame la sintonía del carnaval. Se ha ido la feria, oh ve, se ha ido la fiesta, oh va, se ha ido la folia también. Y ya no tengo nada para dar. Se ha ido la feria, oh ve, se ha ido la fiesta, oh va, se ha ido la folia también. Y ya no tengo nada para dar.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As many as 400,000 people marched through the pouring rain in the Argentine capital of Buenos Aires Wednesday, demanding an independent judiciary. The march came 1 month after the mysterious death of Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who had accused Argentina's president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, of helping to cover up Iran's role in the deadly 1994 bombing of a Jewish community center that killed 85 people and injured hundreds in Buenos Aires. At Wednesday's march, protesters waved placards reading "Truth" and "Justice," while others held posters saying, "I am Nisman."
There was a death. Nisman worked there for, I think, 10 years. I think he deserves our respect, and I've basically come to support other prosecutors who are investigating other cases, mainly for this.
We had to be here. I think that everyone had to be here. The search for justice is something constant, so I think it was worth getting wet.
On January 18th, Alberto Nisman was found dead in his apartment of a gunshot wound to the head. His body was discovered just a day before he was due to testify before lawmakers on his findings on the 1994 attack. Just 4 days earlier, he appeared on television and outlined his allegations against the president and foreign minister, Hector Timerman.
The memorandum, the signing of the memorandum, and the finalization of a process of impunity that started 2 years ago. In January of 2012, President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner ordered her foreign minister to disassociate Iran from the AMIA case for reasons I am going to explain.
Investigators initially said Nisman's death appeared to be a suicide, but no gunpowder residue was found on his hands. If it wasn't a suicide, who killed him? That question's gripped Argentina for the past month. Could it have been Iranian agents or allies of the president or rogue intelligence agents or political opponents of the president? To help us make sense of this unfolding story, we're joined by Sebastian Rotella. He's a senior reporter for the investigative news website ProPublica. His most recent piece is headlined Alberto Nisman and Argentina's History of Assassinations and Suspicious Suicides. He first covered the investigation into the 1994 bombing as a reporter for the Los Angeles Times when he was based in Buenos Aires. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Sebastian. Can you just lay out for us what has taken place and why this, I don't know, do you think it could bring down the government of Cristina Kirchner?
Thank you. Good morning. I don't know if it could bring down the government, but it is certainly perhaps the worst crisis in Argentine democracy since the return of democracy in 1983. And it is a fascinating case in that you have this history of investigations that are like labyrinths that lead not to justice, but to new labyrinths where there's intense suspicion of government manipulation, of corruption, of the use of cases like the AMIA case, like this terrorist case, as part of wars within the security forces and politics instead of reaching the truth. So now you're seeing a really profound moment where people are out in the streets protesting about this case and this suspicious death, but also a larger culture of impunity and support for strengthening the justice system.
Happened in 1994.
I beg your pardon?
Explain what happened in the 1994 bombing of the Jewish community center.
It was the worst anti-Jewish attack in the history of the hemisphere. It was a huge bombing of the AMIA Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, which had been preceded 2 years earlier by another terrorist attack, a car bomb attack on the Israeli embassy. And there were immediate suspicions and evidence and intelligence pointing at Middle Eastern terrorists, at Hezbollah, at Iranian diplomats, but all kinds of theories, all kinds of murky mysteries and contradictions. The investigation was marred by ineptitude and corruption and false leads and police forces and intelligence services battling each other. In fact, a lot of the original investigators were themselves charged with cover-ups or bribery, obstruction of justice. Niesmann became a special prosecutor appointed by the government in 2004 and made considerable progress in achieving indictments of alleged Iranian spies and Hezbollah operatives for whom Interpol warrants were issued in 2007. What happened in 2013 was that the government of Christina Kirchner changed its policy very dramatically and reached an agreement with Iran, ostensibly to set up a truth commission that would investigate the attack. What Niesmann alleged was, this agreement itself was obviously legal, but he alleged that there was a secret criminal conspiracy to absolve Iran behind this memorandum, and that Argentine spies were working against him and even negotiating this agreement with some of the chief suspects in Iran, fugitives in the case.
Now, after Niesmann died and it was ruled a suicide, the president, Christina Kirchner, said she thought it was a suicide. But she's since changed her view and said she believes he was murdered.
That's right. This has caused great consternation and confusion. She very quickly came out and said she thought it was a suicide, and she and her government, of course, deny these charges, which are just charges. And she said she felt Niesmann had been manipulated by allies in the CIDE intelligence service to undermine her government by planting false leads. Then a few days later, as you said, she changed her view and said, not really citing new evidence, but her new thesis that she expressed publicly was that she felt he had been killed by those same forces as part of a larger plot to undermine her government. So as you can imagine, this has caused, in a country where people are kind of automatically suspicious of these kinds of cases where there have been staged suicides and political assassinations that have been covered up at the highest levels in the past, this change in sort of the assessment from the president combined with questions about this death, which may have been a suicide, but it's obviously a strange death with very strange timing by a man who had made very powerful accusations against the president, caused incredible doubt and suspicion.
Opposition Congresswoman Laura Alonso presented her testimony during the investigation into Niesmann's death last week. She was speaking to the prosecutor in charge of the case, Viviana Fine.
In the minutes in which we were alone, Prosecutor Niesmann, while he explained to me the key points of the complaint, looked me in the eyes and said, "Laura, Christina Kirchner ordered everything." He told me he was going forward with the complaint, and I asked Niesmann. I said, "Don't give me the details of the complaint, because I don't want to find out. Nor is it my role to find out, but I do want you to tell me yes or no. If you present this complaint, will I have to call for the president's impeachment?" Niesmann took a breath and said yes.
That's Opposition Congresswoman Laura Alonso. We only have a minute to go. Sebastian, can you comment on what she's saying and what led to Niesmann filing a criminal complaint against the president herself?
I think we have to absolutely understand that this is just a complaint and these very serious allegations have yet to be proven. But there's obviously a great conflict here in the political arena and in the intelligence services in which Niesmann felt that the president and her allies were going after his allies and himself in the intelligence service in terms of trying to remove them and block his case. And his criminal complaint was retaliation against that based on what he felt was strong evidence. It remains to be seen that case is being pursued, how strong the evidence had, and how serious the charges are in terms of being able to implicate powerful people up to the level of the president. That remains to be seen. Hopefully this case will be different than others in the past, and we will actually see some clarity and some justice achieved.
Sebastian Rotella, I want to thank you for being with us, senior reporter for the investigative news website ProPublica. His latest piece, which we will link to, is headlined Alberto Nisman and Argentina's history of assassinations and suspicious suicides.
Thank you.
And that does it for our show. Today is the 19th anniversary of the first radio broadcast of Democracy Now! From the studios of WPFW in Washington, D.C. Now we broadcast on over 1,300 television and radio stations across the globe and reach millions of viewers and listeners through our website at democracynow.org. Go to our website to listen to our first program that aired the day before the 1996 New Hampshire primary. Thanks so much to our staff, our stations, and our audience for making Democracy Now! Possible. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltzer, Martin Nermin Shakes, Stu Martinez, Sam Alka, Fanny Masood, Ravi Karandina Guster, Amy Littlefield. I'm Amy Goodman. Special thanks to Julie Crosby.